So, hi everyone. I'm Juan. I'll be talking about this today. If you didn't read the description of the talk, this is going to be about documentation. So, heads up. I'll try to keep you. It's a good thing it's before lunch, so I'll try to keep you up and running the whole talk. So briefly about me, I don't want to take too much time. I'm from Uruguay, Latin America. I have 2 kids, a boy and a girl. I'm a CTO co-founder of Octobot, as Jorge was saying, self-work consultancy agency. We do a lot of US-based development work with a lot of Django. It's my 2nd time talking here, so I'm so glad to be back, and I'm a huge soccer fan. So let's get that out of the way. What we'll be talking about today. So we're talking about the architectural decision. So is there a problem? The first part is try to frame what we are facing, what sort of the problem that at least I saw, and it seems to be a popular opinion out there that there is a problem. What are architectural decisions? So what is the thing that sort of escaping, that we are not recording? This instrument that I want to introduce, if you don't know it, that's called architectural decision record. Then we'll do live cooking of an ADR, and as with most cooking shows, I'll have the dish ready just in case, and some takeaways. So one of the first things I want to note is that I learned about these things from this book. I have no affiliation with O'Reilly or whatever, but I strongly recommend it because it really helps to push out the boundaries of the unknown, the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknown. So I think it's a great tool to do that. And I learned this about here, and just want to point it out that I strongly recommend that. So, is there a problem? Let's speak about what brings me here. So, you tell me, let's do this sort of role-playing. You are a Django developer in a project, or web developer, whatever. You've been doing 2 years, maybe from the project start, maybe not. You onboarded, but you sort of gotta have a good grasp of what the project is about. And you've been trying to get somebody else to onboard your existing team, and one day that happens, and you got a new coworker. And so that coworker is Mindy from Animaniacs, the Y girl. That's everything Y. She's now a semi-senior Django dev because she's probably mid-20s, something like that. And you gave her the usual welcome pack. So it's hey, welcome to the project, so glad we have you. Here's the code, the access, sort of small walkthrough, maybe some high-level docs, hey, start reading this, and we'll meet 2 days, a week, and we'll do an overview to see if how we're catching up. She's great. And so you run this intro meeting. And so you start, she's hey, which Git branching strategy are you using? And you're yeah, we're using, I know, the GitHub branching strategy. Why? And it's because, it's no, sort of convenient, because it's sort of what we used, and okay, great. And you're hey, what DB backend you're using? And yeah, I saw that. I saw in the settings, Postgres. All right. Why? Why are you using Postgres? So you're starting, I don't know. And so you start getting to these questions it's not that those decisions are wrong, but you start thinking why? Are you doing templates or rendering? No, we have a REST API and a separate web app, or we're doing GraphQL. Let's say you have a Django REST framework. Great tool. Why? Why do you use REST? It's like, okay. And so these kinds of questions, Mindy could not get the answers from what you have out there. And she's relying on you, that team, to get to that information. And a lot of the times, that information is either not there because nobody asked the why question, or it's lost. So eventually, somebody say, yeah, we're using REST framework, but that's gone. So what's happening? Proposal. So we are regularly losing relevant information of that sort of decisions we are making. So this, like, hey, how are we going to solve this problem? How are we going to do that sort of, like, I hope, like, everybody has been in one of those. There is this thing that is getting lost. Particularly, what's getting lost is the context. So what was the context that you took this alternative, and also the alternatives that were considered. So you are effectively losing a bit of this information. I'm going to risk this and say a show of hands for people that has been in some sort of similar scenario where this information. Whew. Great, I have something to tell you. So now you might say, hey, it will be great if we have this, but perhaps it's not a problem, you know? Not necessarily everything that's not good is a problem. So I have, like, this take that it's not only me, that this is a problem. So first, why is this a problem? Because we cannot reflect, we cannot reliably at least reflect on our decisions. We cannot say, hey, did we consider this, like this option, when we decided on, like, was GraphQL even on the table? Was that thing? Or is this, like, this is thing that's happening? Did we agree on this? Did we envision that this was something that could happen if we make this choice? A lot of the time, you don't have some, like, cold record of that. It's hard to onboard new people. If new people comes, it's like, why have you made all these decisions? Have you considered X in the past? And it's like, yeah. So it's hard for new people to come on board and understand the rationale behind those decisions. And so a side effect of that is that knowledge hoarding sort of naturally appears, because it's not that they have this effective way of, like, taking that knowledge and putting it into something that other people can read. And also, evolving is challenging. So when something changes, you might need to adapt. You might not. But understanding when you need to adapt implies that that change impacts your assumptions. So you have this change, it's like, hey, does this change impact in any way some of the assumptions we have made for decisions in the past? There is no clear way to make that call if you don't have this sort of, like, way to persist that knowledge, that context, that options that were considered. So what's causing this? Well, perhaps our regular tools are not specifically designed to this. They are not able to capture the changes. They're more like current state of affairs, but we don't have, like, the deltas. And also, you don't have the why. Why did you make that delta in that direction? And when I say specifically designed, just to be clear, it's like there is no field usually in a README for, like, yeah, we changed this because what? This is just a freeform thing that's not specifically designed for that. So I went on and, like, looked for current tools. So perhaps, by the way, perhaps these tools are not there. So what do regular tools look like? So I went to Confluence, like, decision-making template, and this popped out. And it's like, it's not bad. Like, you have to go in and fill stuff, but you're like, the outcome, what should I put there? What should go there? Into, like, what's a pro and con for an option? Why something and pro and con is like, everybody agrees on what a pro and con is, but Does everybody agree? So there is a catch there. The cost. So there is like pieces of information that we need to fill in. There's like might be unclear, or you're not sure how to perform that consistently. But it's a good start. So in the lightweight part of the spectrum, we have this. On the harder part of the spectrum, we have people at NASA that have these missions that span sometimes decades, like Juno, James Webb Space Telescope. Like you are making a decision now that will impact how things work 10 years from now. And they have like master thesis on decision making and what should we capture and the sociological factors and the whole thing. That I'll put the link because it's actually fascinating, but it's super thorough and costly. They need that, but on fast-pacing agile environments, are those real tools to tackle what we need? Are those effective? Maybe not. So one of the people have been working in this, and they have found out that the assets that were or are out there to capture this sort of information are not effective in some industrial scenarios. For instance, web development. And so because you have like this sort of agile, fast-paced development a lot of times, so the tools that are there are not effective, that they get in the way more than help you out, right? So I felt that. Luckily, other people felt that the same and backed that with a bit of evidence. So the tool might be wrong. So I will speak about decision records. That is this not new, but new thing that I want to present. And they try to capture this thing. What is this thing? Well, this thing is an architectural decision. This is the thing. The Italian hand is because the only emoji, and I'm familiar with that. So that is the thing that we need to capture. And what does that look like? So just to be cover the formal, an architectural decision is a software design choice that addresses a functional or non-functional requirement that is architecturally significant. Next question is, what is something that's architecturally significant? And so there's that. An architecturally significant requirement is a requirement that has a measurable effect on a software system's architecture and quality. I'll just leave that there, so it's cover the formals. This acronym won't come back, this definition won't come back, and we'll go onto more like rule of thumb stuff to cover, but I do want to point out there. So the short form of this, what is an architecture definition? What we're trying to grasp is something that is hard to change. So we are changing something functional, non-functional, that is hard to change. Sort of like the two-way doors, one-way door analogy that Amazon had and stuff like that. One of the good things about framing architectural decisions this way is it really distresses the architecture part from the concept. So we are not pushing the taxonomy on stuff. It's oh, is this architecture? Is this not architecture? Don't bother. Just say it's something hard to change. So that's sort of the short form. I have an heuristic to sort of understand when we are facing an architectural decision. It's is this an architectural decision? The first one is we need to meet to discuss this. And that's cue, you're onto an architectural decision there. What framework should I use? Is this Vue? Is this React? You're facing an architectural decision. And finally, hey, we could use this brand new thing that just came out that's right for our problems. Maybe we could, maybe we don't. But that sort of questions that I hope a lot of people come through eventually do match as an architectural decisions. Others should we build this? Should we use something existing? Some infrastructure calls, you name it. That's sort of what we are trying to capture, architectural decision. So why is this tool I'm presenting? So the architectural decision record is a short text description. We'll see like it's like 1 page, 2 page long, no longer than that. It was first proposed by Michael. Last name I won't pronounce out of respect. But there's the actual link when he proposed that, and has seen adoption from that time now on. So like ThoughtWorks in their tech radar now is like marks it as adopt. And so this is this like text message. And so the most important part is that it's very practical to fill. So, and that's the spirit and the essence of what an ADR, I'm going to use the acronym from now on, that's an architectural decision record, on what an ADR is like. So it's something that's very practical to fill that captures this, and we'll cover what needs to capture. And it's written sort of like this message for a future developer. So like these messages in a bottle, stuff like that, like, hey, we're stuck on the island and we're trying to build a boat, and boom, message in a bottle. That's sort of the spirit that we are trying to convey here in what we will be writing. So Lee here spoke yesterday about logging, and so this sort of has the same thing. He's saying, when you log, you have like captain and pilots might relate to this, and same goes here. Captain and pilot might relate to this, but hopefully software developers will do as well. So it's this journal. You'll be recording stuff and making notes on like certain decisions that you will make. There is this, I put this link, so there is this blog post that's very brief but very good from 18F, something from the federal government that's the software, but it's very good. I'll strongly suggest if you're interested in this to follow up and read that. But that's sort of the spirit of this. One important part of this is that ADRs are for technical people. So they're intended for developers, like technology stuff, people that is able to read like technology-written things. Why? Because it should be practical to fill. We don't want to explain everything. If you are like, Python is an interpreted language that was very good semantics. Django is a Brave framework. The web is, and so if you start doing that sort of explanation because you want everybody to understand your ADR, it's just not practical to fill. So the idea is that other roles at your project, business people, we good. Product people, no good. Yeah, good. The hand thing is going to keep happening. So other docs might be more suitable for those kinds of positions, and that's fine. We might use it eventually to justify some decisions, like, hey, we did take this decision because X, and I can explain it to you, but it's not meant for you to read straightforward without some context and some background information. So what's in an ADR? So there's 4 things. First, context. Why this change needed to happen? Why now? Why not before? It's like something changed that you need to make this call now. What needed to be considered? Like what is part of the context that we are placing into our process right now that needs to be considered in this discussion? The options. What are the alternatives that we are currently considering? This is super important. For instance, if in the future a new alternative appears that was not considered back then. Even if somebody new comes along, they can say, hey, have you considered X? Yes, we have, and we said no in this decision. What were the pros and cons of each? Like maybe a can back then is no longer a can now, and we can reevaluate. The consequences. So what will happen as a result of the change, both in a good way and a bad way? Decisions are always about trade-offs. So you're making saying, hey, I want this, and we are willing to take this luggage with us, and that's fine. And so in the future, say, hey, what's this thing here? Yeah. We decided back then that we prefer this, so we can get this. And the status. This is one of the most important parts for me because, well, this has like the very intuitive, like proposed, accepted, implemented. but it also has the superseded part. So this is the status that you'll say, hey, this ADR has been superseded by this decision. So you start to get a timeline once you do it consistently over time of like, hey, we decided X, and this like overcomes decision in the past. And so you don't drop that. You say, hey, back in the days, we decided this, that was superseded by this new decision because context changed, new option appear, whatever. And so you get this very consistent timeline of like how things change. And you start to convey the why and the context. So 4 things in it. Now, you'll say, hey, but how do I fill all 4 things? So one of the important parts about ADRs is that you can set your own structure for it. And you can customize beyond the basics. I mean, you need to cover the 4 basics. And I can show you like what we use at Octobot. It has to keep the spirit that it must be something practical to fill. So if you make like a 4-page template, it's like, no. You can make like an organization-wide ADR template, like for a project, you can make a specific one. If you are a CLI fan, there are tools out there, so you can like spin out ADRs from a template via CLI. And the important part about this is that it guides the discussion. So you sort of, those discussions start to become on like, how will we fill the information in this? How do we go through the process? And that's what we'll see while we cook. And so that's something important to consider while we are creating our structure. So you'll see some meta header, like on top, like YAML. So say, hey, the status, the date, people involved. You could structure that like deciders, consulted, informed, stuff like that. But it's sort of freeform, should be brief. There should be a title that sort of explains what this decision is about. And I can tell you what we have in our ADR template. So we have this title, context and problem statement, just like 2 paragraphs explaining what's going on. We do have a separate section on decisions drivers and like what we are trying to achieve, like what is how we will pick a winner before you consider the options, like how we will pick a winner. What are we trying to go after? The options consider the decision outcome. So we choose X because we wanted this, and we accept this as luggage. And you'll see the pros and cons, and then pros and cons of the other options. There's also optional parts like validation, how we will enforce this, and like those are more like level 2 stuff. So if you are going into, that's just starting with ADRs, you don't need that. That's my take. Where does it live? So there is no straight answer for this. A lot of people say different things. Some people say and strongly suggest that it lives as close to code as possible. So because it's not like business doc, it's not like code and commit history, it's right in the middle, let's say, like in that part. So it sort of gravitates toward the lower, let's say, information part, but you can have it on a wiki or whatever your team usually relies on to retrieve information from a project. That's sort of the habitat of where ADRs live. Like the original author says, no, it must be in the repo, but what will you do if you have multi-repo? It's like, make your own choice, but don't have it somewhere that's inaccessible regularly for a developer. All right, so cooking an ADR. So we'll do this live cooking thing. Sort of a foodie, so yeah, I thought it was a good analogy. We'll see. So the good thing about this part is that it's really a lightweight process. So it's really more about structuring what you are currently doing to capture this information, to decide. So it's sort of like brings a bit of structure, but nothing too serious. And you have the positive side of the law of the instrument. If you don't know what that is, it's like when the only thing you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if the only thing that you have is an ADR, everything like you start to frame discussions into like that form, and it's good actually. That's my take again. Short note: you need a kitchen first. So the important part here is that when you are making decisions, there is usually context that changes. But there is usually context that does not change. The sort of background noise that's always there, that does not change, it usually takes the form of architectural characteristics, all the ilities, and scalability does not count. You're not school anymore. That's a given in 2022. And people say, you need to list some. All right, adaptability, usability, availability, observability. So those are the things that are background noise. Like, this project is really sensitive to latency. This project is really sensitive to uptime and availability. So that sort of things should be stated in somewhere. We won't be listing all of those on each decision. It's part of like this common context, this global North Star, global decision driver. Good thing, if you are starting with this, you don't have this. You usually have those, but like in your mind, it should not be like vast or complete. Just like go and say, hey, I got this architectural feature list I got from the internet. There are 20. Okay, pick 3. You are making 2 decisions, which one you take and which ones you don't take. And that's super important. The case I will be presenting today and on why we are framing this is like we will present a real architectural decision, and this was for a last mile delivery solution. So the retail chain, they have these mottos and vans and people like delivering, like Amazon, I don't know, here, delivering packages. And so they had this custom last mile delivery solution being built. It had a React web dashboard and also an Android app made in Angular. The system emits alerts for different types. So this is not part of the ADR. I'm just bringing this so you can understand what follows. So let's get our ingredients to make this ADR. So the first part is we need to articulate the question to answer. And you might say, hey, that doesn't sound so difficult. And if you have some mileage on you, a lot of times, once you frame your question appropriately, like, solutions come more easily. So what's really the questions? Sort of throw in there like the 7 whys, stuff like that, so we can like really get to the core of what we are trying to achieve there. And state the problem context. So why is something undesirable now a problem? What has happened? Like, what has changed? Why are we facing this now? Again, short. We don't want to go like overboard, like 3 pages long. Maybe there is some sort of resource we can link, but we won't be reading that in the meeting, and that does not make any sense to go out and fill massively. In our way, this was in our dish, this was the context. So we need to send alerts. We need to send push notifications both to web and to mobile. That's done with React Native. We have, at that point, deployed the product in the staging environment for a client in infrastructure we don't handle, and that was a highly frictionless process. We are behind schedule at this point. We have open risk in the algorithm that routes the packages. That's like the core product. And we have a proof of concept of web sockets for the dashboard. So we have this sort of like notifications coming through. Not notification, we have this sort of proof of concepts working. So let's do the mise en place. That's when the cook like prepares everything to start cooking afterward. So one important part here is like, let's choose who will be involving in this discussion. Like, not everybody needs to be involved. Who will be responsible for, like, who will make the call? Like, is it somebody? That's usually good. A lot of times it's like, no, it's 2 people, 3 people, whatever. But let's state that. Regarding who should be there, usually either people that is experienced and can pitch in like options, pros and cons, stuff like that. And also people that is affected by decisions, like developers or like infra people, whatever. And also start to state your decision driver. So what are we going to strike for? So this is like, yeah, for this decision, this will be important, this will be important. And so we have a clear frame or North Star of what we are trying to do. That's especially important because it will help you understand the trade-offs you'll be making. So if you ever heard about DASI or alternative RASI or whatever, this sounds familiar. It's not, it's a cousin, it can help. I'm just pitching this in because people can say, hey, you never heard about this? It's like, yep, but this is more specific. So it's more like a specific cousin for architectural decisions. So in our case, what were the decisions drivers? We were behind schedule, and so there were a lot of open risks. So we were like, we want a quick, low-risk implementations for these alerts. Latency, but not at every cost. We want latency to be in some threshold. If not, alerts might be useless because they stop becoming alerts. It should be easier to configure or operate because we won't be doing them, and last time there was friction there, so let's keep that in mind. And also low operational cost. I'm listing that here because that was actually one of the factors that drove our customer to build their solution because they don't want to pay like fees for each package that were like logged in, whatever. So that's one of the parts, and I'm listing that because it's part of the background noise, but it's relevant for you to have this decision. So let's go. That was not complete. So and the gifts are to spice stuff. So first, let's go through a decision driver. So we meet, we say, hey, what we are trying to strive for. We pitch options. So hey, I think this can be useful. Great, let's consider that. So you sort of line up some alternatives. So if you're facing one alternative, there's probably no decision to be made. But if not, you'll be listing options and say, hey, these are the options. And then we start pitching like pros and cons. What are pros and cons? So important thing about pros and cons, it usually helps us to keep us relatively away from bias. And that's a good thing usually because we start to be more like objective. And the other thing is that a pro and con to be a pro and con must hit some way a decision drivers. Like, no, the documents for this library have dark mode. That's great. Not relevant. It's not a pro. It's at least unless you will be reading that for 2 months straight, 6 hours a day. Maybe then it is because we don't want somebody like losing their eyes or whatever. So I'm not going to go in depth for each of these, but you have this, we consider Firebase and WebSockets. So we have Firebase, cloud notifications, something like that. And this is like easy to implement, low risk. Latency is somehow out of our control. It's free, actually. It's third-party operated. In this case, it's good because the operations part did not work well, so we want to keep that out of them. There is vendor lock-in, so this sort of goes to a bit of the background goals and problems. We have WebSocket, so sort of free as well. It's more flexible. Lower latency, but uncertainty starts to creep in, and you can see in these pros and cons. And again, short, like concise, like boom, 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 6, 8 items. Like, do they hit the decision drivers? That's something that you will usually talk in a less complete way. So when you're discussing, it's like, yeah, I think this is good because blah, 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 blah. And but you have to be careful with X and Y, and you probably cover like 4. But when you have to list them, it's like, okay, maybe you can reach 6. And so you have a bit better understanding of what's going on. So everything good. So next step is to decide. So you have your context, you have what you're trying to rank options, like the options and pros and cons, and it's like, okay, what you gonna do? So you decide. And when you decide, you'll be saying, yeah, you know, this is why we're choosing X, Y. It's like, it doesn't mean like formally, logically justifies like from where we are now, we're making this decision based on this, and for us, it's a better path forward. No need to go in depth, like, we have like 8 pages paper long justification on why this latency won't be a problem. It's like, no, just like common sense stuff that's better than nil. We are currently like none of this information is captured. No need to go in depth. And also you can rely on perception eventually. Like sometimes it's like sort of even, we don't have and like, well, we're going for this and it's fine. Like sort of gut, just state it, because people can later on say like, yep, it was an even thing and they went with this, but it was just like a preference. And it's completely fine. That's stuff that happens, but you need to state it because things can change down the road and that might impact the decision. In this case, we use Firebase because, well, it was an out-of-the-box solution, lower risk. It was less flexible, so we are stating like, we are losing flexibility in this decision, but it's fine. We want to get out of the risky situation we are now. This might change down the road, and it's completely acceptable. For instance, we are saying this incurs in an acceptable latency. So if later latency becomes unacceptable, we know when we incur in that decision. And we can change that. That's fine. But we have this frame of understanding, like, should we change something? And just the meta header, like, what is going on there? People is involved, they know who they are, and hi. So some takeaways from what we learned. So first, what we found, so working with companies, different projects, find that we are not alone in this project, so in this problem. So this seems to be like this pattern in this industry, so that's bad, but that's also good because it's not an isolated thing. So we can start to work in like common solutions that we can adapt and evolve. ADRs are great for agile execution, so it really is like low weight mechanism. It helps shape the discussion, so again, the hammer thing, and it scales, so people start to adopt it. There is no like, no, we have the ADR master that needs to clear. It's like, people start to get it pretty quick, and the most important part is start to doing like exercise. Like the most important day is the first day. So it eventually starts to capture information that, again, we are losing today. So everything is like an infinite speed up. Benefits, well, those are listed in that link. I won't be covering, so we have a bit of time for questions eventually, but important parts, it might uncover options you haven't considered. So you will say, hey, we missed that. That's great, we can go back to that decision and consider a new option. Forces you to clarify assumptions. You will be saying in your context, hey, we assume this. And again, going back to the beginning, like if something changes, your assumption changes, you need to evolve. Leads teams to consensus, one of the most important parts for me, because what happens is now we have a consensus on why we reached that decision. Another stuff, like we can set aside one day or like 1 hour and like step back, what we're trying to achieve, what are the goals of the project, of this decision, and so that exercise really helps out. Reading ADRs also helps in different ways. New people can onboard easier, but I highlight the third point. So one of the most important parts is like it can show some maintainer, some developer down the road if their change they are trying to bring has already been considered. And if it has been discarded, why? Because you'll learn a lot from that decision. Like, I think this is good, and people say, and in the past, it has been said, no, this is bad because X, and say, oh, right, and you'll uncover something you didn't know, or maybe it's time to recall that decision. And can be shown as justifications for stakeholders. So, like, somebody comes along, it's like, hey, software architect, whatever, like, yeah, what's going on with this? Yeah, we make this call. So just enough to justify why we did that. And 99.9% of the cases is enough. And that's it.
We have about 4 minutes for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. I'm curious, how do you get into the habit of making these decisions? Do you include it in your...
Sorry, could you?
How do you get in the habit of making these decisions? How do you get it into your process? Is it a sprint ritual that you have, like a set time every so often we have one of these meetings and discuss what we have to decide on, or is it more an ad hoc?
It's sort of like I have an emotion in Slack. So when people are like, yeah, discussing stuff, and I click, like, this might be a good thing to do an ADR about, and they start to joke, and they use the same emoji. But a lot of the times is starting to get teams with that mindset. In my case, I'm usually called in to like, we need help for this. It's like, all right, is this like technical help, or like, are we facing this sort of decision? So you got a cue, like, we need to meet. And the important part is like, in my experience, in our experience, like, teams adopt this because they see the benefit and it's a low effort thing. So in the article I was mentioning, they speak about how it's important to just start, because it really becomes, I wouldn't say like a natural thing, but something that you can do and start to see the benefit, and that you get better at. You know, you start picking up muscle memory, and so those meetings like go smoother by each time you do. I don't know if it covers the question, but thank you.
Any other questions? Get to you, Kid, in just a moment. I have one here.
Can this be performed on existing mature architecture?
Yeah, I mean, it's complementary. So in the book, they are like pro software architects, and they cover how it relates to like what do you do when you have a staff of software architects working in your organization, coordinating across products. Like, how do ADRs work in that scenario? You can. It's sort of the same. What you usually have is like decision drivers, and those sort of things come from regular places. So you have this base of what you're trying to achieve, the architecture characteristics, and you have like what's called like feature-based architectures, something like that, when you try to measure things so your architecture is compliant to what was defined. So it will touch those points, ADRs in that scenario, but I strongly suggest for that case to go and read like the book that says how it better interacts with in those scenarios.
All good questions, but we are at time. So let's give a warm round of applause to Juan to thank him for his talk.
Thank you.